The morning started like any other Tuesday for David. His alarm clock buzzed at 5:30, same as always. He rolled out of his tiny bed in the studio apartment he shared with two roommates. The walls were paper thin and he could hear one of them snoring through the wall. Money was tight, really tight. He had been working 2 jobs just to keep his head above water. David grabbed his phone and checked his bank account. $43.27. His heart sank a little. He had been saving for months to buy a plane ticket to see his sick grandmother back home in Alabama. She had raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was just 12 years old. Now she was in the hospital and the doctor said she didn't have much time left. The ticket cost $350. He had been putting away $5 or $10 whenever he could, sometimes going without lunch to save that extra money. His grandmother meant everything to him. She was the one who taught him how to tie his shoes, helped him with homework, and held him when he cried about missing his parents. David worked at a warehouse during the day, loading trucks and moving boxes. The work was hard on his back, but it paid decent money. At night, he delivered food for a delivery app, driving his old car around the city until late. His car was 15 years old and made strange noises, but it still ran. He couldn't afford to fix it properly, so he just hoped it would keep going. 3 weeks ago, something amazing happened. His boss at the warehouse told him there was overtime available. David jumped at the chance. He worked extra hours every day for 2 weeks straight. His body was exhausted, but his bank account finally had enough money for the plane ticket. He booked it immediately, feeling proud and excited. He would leave Friday morning and spend the weekend with his grandmother. But then Wednesday came. David was at the warehouse stacking boxes as usual when his phone rang. It was his landlord. The rent was going up by $200 next month. David felt his stomach drop. He asked if there was any way to keep it the same, but his landlord said no. The neighborhood was getting more expensive and everyone's rent was going up. David sat in his car during lunch break, staring at his phone. The plane ticket was already paid for, but now he had a choice to make. Keep the ticket and risk not having enough money for rent, or cancel the trip and use the money to cover the rent increase. His hands shook as he thought about it. His grandmother was waiting for him. She had been so happy when he called to tell her he was coming. He called the airline to ask about canceling. They said he could get most of his money back minus a $50 fee. It wasn't ideal, but it would help with the rent situation. David closed his eyes and made the decision. He would cancel the trip and work extra shifts to save up again. Maybe he could visit his grandmother in a few months when he had more money saved up. Friday morning arrived. David should have been on a plane, but instead he was getting ready for work. He felt heavy inside, like someone had put rocks in his chest. He kept thinking about his grandmother lying in that hospital bed, probably wondering why he wasn't there yet. He had called her the night before to explain, and she said she understood, but he could hear the disappointment in her voice. David decided to treat himself to breakfast at the small diner near the bus stop. He never ate out anymore because it was too expensive, but today he felt like he needed something to cheer him up. The diner was old and worn down, but the food was good and cheap. He ordered scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee for $6. While he was eating, he noticed an older woman at the table next to him. She looked worried and kept checking her phone. She had gray hair and was wearing a simple blue dress. Her hands were shaking a little as she tried to drink her coffee. David could tell something was wrong. The woman called someone on her phone. David tried not to listen, but her voice carried across the small diner. She was talking to what sounded like her daughter, explaining that she had missed her flight to see her new grandchild. She had gotten confused about the time and arrived at the airport too late. The next flight wasn't until Monday and she couldn't afford to change her ticket. David's heart went out to her. He knew exactly how she felt. That feeling of missing something important because of money problems was something he understood all too well. The woman hung up the phone and started crying quietly. She tried to hide it, but David could see her shoulders shaking. He finished his breakfast and walked over to her table. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said softly. "I couldn't help but notice you seem upset. Is everything okay?" The woman looked up at him with red eyes. "Oh, honey, I'm sorry. I don't mean to bother anyone. I just missed my flight to see my new grandson. He was born 3 days ago, and this was my only chance to meet him before my daughter goes back to work. But I messed up the time and got to the airport too late." David sat down across from her. "That's terrible. I'm so sorry that happened to you. The airline wants $300 to put me on another flight, she continued. I just don't have that kind of money. I'm on a fixed income and I already spent everything I had on the original ticket. David felt something stir in his chest. $300. That was almost exactly what he had gotten back from canceling his own flight. He looked at this woman, probably someone's grandmother just like his own, and he made a decision that surprised even him. Ma'am, what if I told you I could help you get on that flight? She looked at him with confusion. What do you mean, sweetheart? David pulled out his phone and checked his bank account again. The refund from his canceled ticket had come through. He had $308.47. I can pay for your new ticket. You should be with your family right now. The woman's eyes got wide. Oh no, honey. I can't let you do that. You don't even know me. That doesn't matter, David said. Family is important. I know what it's like to miss out on seeing the people you love because of money. You shouldn't have to go through that. For the next 10 minutes, the woman tried to talk him out of it. She said it was too much money, that he probably needed it for himself, that she would be fine waiting until she could save up enough. But David had made up his mind. He knew this was the right thing to do, even if it meant he would have to start saving all over again to see his own grandmother. They walked to the airport together. David paid for her new ticket with his debit card, watching his bank balance drop back down to almost nothing. But when he saw the smile on her face, he knew he had made the right choice. Sometimes helping others is more important than helping yourself. David watched the woman's plane taxi down the runway from the airport window. She had hugged him so tight before going through security that he thought she might never let go. Her eyes were full of tears, but this time they were happy tears. She kept saying thank you over and over, and David just smiled and told her to give her grandson an extra hug from him. The bus ride home felt different. David was broke again, completely broke, but something inside him felt lighter than it had in months. He kept thinking about the look on her face when she realized she would actually make it to see her new grandson. That moment made everything worth it. When he got back to his apartment, his roommate Tony was in the kitchen making lunch. Tony worked at a restaurant and always came home with leftover food, which helped everyone save money on groceries. How come you're not on your way to Alabama? Tony asked, looking confused. I thought your flight was this morning. David sat down at their small kitchen table and told Tony the whole story. About the rent going up, canceling his flight, meeting the woman at the diner, and using his refund money to buy her a new ticket. Tony listened without saying anything, just nodding along. Man, you're crazy, Tony said when David finished, but crazy in a good way. I don't know if I would have done the same thing. She reminded me of my grandma, David said. I couldn't just sit there and watch her cry about missing her grandson when I had the money to help. What are you going to do about seeing your grandmother now? Tony asked. David shrugged. I'll figure it out. Maybe in a few months I can save up again. That weekend, David picked up extra delivery shifts to start rebuilding his savings. His old car made even more strange noises than usual, but he ignored them. He delivered food all over the city, from fancy restaurants to people's doorsteps. Some customers tipped well, others didn't tip at all. It was unpredictable work, but every dollar counted. On Sunday night, he got a call from his cousin in Alabama. His grandmother had been asking about him, wondering when he was coming to visit. His cousin said she seemed weaker than before, and the doctors were talking about moving her to hospice care soon. David felt his heart break a little more. He wanted so badly to be there with her. The next few weeks passed slowly. David worked every day, sometimes 14 hours between his warehouse job and deliveries. He was exhausted all the time, but he kept thinking about that plane ticket. Every $5 or $10 he managed to save felt like a small victory. 3 weeks after helping the woman at the airport, something unexpected happened. David was coming home from his delivery shift around midnight when he saw someone sitting on the steps outside his apartment building. As he got closer, he realized it was an older black man wearing a nice suit. The man looked tired, like he had been waiting for a while. Excuse me, the man said, standing up as David approached. Are you David? David stopped walking. He didn't recognize this man, and it was pretty late for someone to be waiting outside his building. Yeah, that's me. Can I help you? The man smiled. My name is Robert. I think you helped my wife a few weeks ago at the airport. Helen? You bought her a plane ticket to see our grandson? David's eyes went wide. Helen, is she okay? How did you find me? She's more than okay, Robert said, his smile getting bigger. She had the most wonderful time with our daughter and grandson. She hasn't stopped talking about the kind young man who helped her. She was determined to find you and thank you properly. You didn't have to do that, David said. I'm just glad she made it to see her family. Helen remembered you paid with a card, so she called the airline and sweet-talked them into giving her your full name. Then we hired someone to help us track down your address. Helen wanted to come herself, but she's been busy helping our daughter with the baby. David was amazed that they had gone through so much trouble to find him. That's really nice of you both, but you didn't need to track me down. Seeing her happy was enough for me. Robert reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. Helen and I talked about this a lot. We know you gave up something important to help her. She told me you mentioned missing a trip to see your own grandmother. It's okay, David said quickly. I'll get there eventually. We want to help you get there sooner, Robert said, holding out the envelope. This is for you. David looked at the envelope but didn't take it. I can't accept money from you. I helped because I wanted to, not because I expected anything back. We know that, Robert said. That's exactly why we want to do this. Good people like you are rare, David. The world needs more people who help others without expecting anything in return. David still hesitated. It's really not necessary. Robert smiled and gently pressed the envelope into David's hands. Helen made me promise not to leave here until you took this. She said if you refuse, she'll drive over here herself and camp out on your doorstep until you accept it. David couldn't help but laugh at that image. She sounds pretty determined. You have no idea, Robert said with a chuckle. 45 years of marriage taught me not to argue with that woman when she's made up her mind about something. David opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a check for $1,500. His hands started shaking. I can't take this much money. This is way more than I spent on her ticket. It's not about the money you spent, Robert explained. It's about what you gave up. Helen said you canceled your own trip to help her. We looked up plane tickets to Alabama, hotel costs, everything. We wanted to make sure you could take a proper trip to see your grandmother and have some left over. David stared at the check, unable to believe what he was seeing. $1,500 was more money than he had seen at one time in years. Are you sure about this? Completely sure, Robert said. But there's one condition. David looked up nervously. What's that? You have to promise us you'll actually use it to see your grandmother. No spending it on rent or bills or anything else. Helen was very specific about that. David felt tears starting to form in his eyes. I promise. I absolutely promise, Robert patted David on the shoulder. Good. Helen also wanted me to tell you that your grandmother is lucky to have a grandson like you. Anyone who raised such a kind young man must be pretty special herself. They talked for a few more minutes on the steps. Robert told David about meeting his grandson for the first time. How Helen cried happy tears when she held him, and how grateful their daughter was that Helen had made it for the visit. He said Helen had called it a miracle that she met David that morning at the diner. After Robert left, David sat on the steps for a long time just holding the check and thinking about everything that had happened. 3 weeks ago, he thought helping Helen meant giving up his chance to see his grandmother. Now, because of her kindness, he could not only visit his grandmother but stay longer and maybe even bring her some flowers or a nice gift. Sometimes the best things in life come when you least expect them, especially when you're busy helping other people. David couldn't sleep that night. He kept looking at the check on his nightstand, making sure it was real and not just a dream. $1,500. He had never held that much money in his hands before. Every few minutes he would pick up his phone to book a flight to Alabama, then put it down again, worried that somehow the check might not be real. The next morning, David took the check to the bank as soon as it opened. The teller looked at it carefully and ran it through her computer. Everything looks good, she said with a smile. The funds will be available in your account by tomorrow morning. David felt like he could breathe properly for the first time in weeks. He immediately pulled out his phone and booked a flight for Friday. This time he didn't just buy the cheapest ticket. He got one that he could change if needed, just in case. He also booked a hotel room near the hospital so he could spend as much time as possible with his grandmother. That evening, David called his cousin in Alabama to let him know he was coming. Thank God, his cousin said. Grandma's been asking about you every day. The doctors moved her to hospice yesterday. She's comfortable, but she's getting weaker. David's heart sank. Is she going to be okay until Friday? I think so. his cousin said carefully. She's a tough old lady. When I told her you were coming to visit, she perked up more than she has in days. She said she's been holding on just to see you one more time. Friday morning came slowly. David had packed and repacked his small suitcase 3 times. He brought the photo album his grandmother had made for him after his parents died, thinking she might like to look through it with him. He also stopped at a flower shop and bought a small bouquet of yellow roses, her favorite color. The flight to Alabama was only 2 hours, but it felt like the longest 2 hours of David's life. He kept checking his phone for updates from his cousin and looking out the window, willing the plane to go faster. When they finally landed, David was the first person off the plane. His cousin picked him up at the airport. "How is she?" David asked before he was even fully in the car. "She's hanging in there," his cousin said. "The nurses say she's been more alert today than she's been all week. I think she knows you're coming." The hospice facility was smaller and quieter than David had expected. It looked more like a nice house than a hospital. There were flowers in the garden outside and soft music playing in the lobby. A nurse with kind eyes showed David to his grandmother's room. "She's been talking about you all morning," the nurse said softly. "She's very excited that you're here." David stood outside the door for a moment, taking a deep breath. He hadn't seen his grandmother in over a year because of work and money problems. He was nervous about how much she might have changed. When he walked into the room, his grandmother was lying in bed, but her eyes were open and alert. She looked smaller than he remembered, more fragile, but her smile was exactly the same. "There's my boy," she said, her voice weak but full of love. "I knew you'd make it here." David rushed to her bedside and gently hugged her. "I'm so sorry it took me so long to get here, Grandma." "Hush now," she said, patting his back with a hand that felt like paper. "You're here now, and that's all that matters." David spent the next hour telling his grandmother about his life in the city, his jobs, his roommates, and everything else he could think of. But he didn't tell her about the money struggles or the canceled flight or meeting Helen. He wanted this time to be happy. His grandmother listened to every word, asking questions and smiling. "You sound like you're doing well for yourself," she said. "I'm proud of you, baby. I always knew you'd grow up to be a good man." "You taught me everything I know," David said, holding her hand. "Your parents would be so proud of you too," she said. "You have your daddy's kind heart and your mama's strong spirit." They looked through the photo album together. His grandmother told him stories about each picture that he had forgotten or never heard before. Stories about his parents when they were young, about his first steps, his first day of school. David felt like he was getting pieces of his history back. "Grandma," David said after a while, "there's something I want to tell you about." He told her the whole story about Helen at the airport, giving up his own ticket and how Helen and Robert had found him to give him the money for this trip. His grandmother listened without saying anything, but David could see tears forming in her eyes. "That sounds just like something you would do," she said when he finished. "Even when you were little, you were always sharing your toys with kids who didn't have any." "I almost didn't come because I was embarrassed about not having enough money," David admitted. His grandmother squeezed his hand as tight as she could. "Listen to me, baby. Being poor isn't something to be ashamed of. What matters is how you treat people and what kind of man you are inside. And you, my sweet boy, are one of the good ones." David stayed at the hospice until late that night. They watched her favorite TV shows together, and he helped her eat a little bit of dinner. When visiting hours were over, he kissed her forehead and promised to come back first thing in the morning. "I love you, Grandma," he said. "I love you too, baby, more than you'll ever know." David went back to his hotel room, but he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about what his grandmother had said about being one of the good ones. He had never really thought of himself that way. He just tried to do the right thing when he could. The next morning, David woke up early and went straight to the hospice. He brought coffee and donuts for the nurses, who had been so kind to his grandmother. When he got to her room, she was awake and waiting for him. "I was hoping you'd come early," she said. "I wanted to give you something." She asked him to look in the drawer of her bedside table. Inside was a small jewelry box that David remembered from her house. "Open it," she said. Inside the box was a simple gold wedding ring. "This was your grandfather's ring," she said. "He wanted you to have it when you got older. I've been saving it for the right time." David's eyes filled with tears. His grandfather had died when David was very young. but he remembered him as a gentle man who always had candy in his pockets. He would have loved to see the man you've become. His grandmother said, "You're just like him, always thinking about other people before yourself." David slipped the ring onto his finger. It fit perfectly. They spent the whole day together, talking and laughing and sometimes just sitting quietly holding hands. His grandmother told him more stories about his family, about her own childhood, about dreams she had when she was young. As the sun started to set, his grandmother looked tired but peaceful. "Thank you for coming, baby," she said. "This has been the best day I've had in a long time." "Thank you for waiting for me," David said. "I'll always wait for you," she said with a smile. No matter what, David woke up on Sunday morning with a heavy feeling in his chest. His phone was ringing and he could see his cousin's name on the screen. David's hands were shaking as he answered. "She passed peacefully about an hour ago," his cousin said gently. "The nurses said she went in her sleep. No pain." David sat on the edge of his hotel bed trying to process the words. Even though he knew this day was coming, it still felt like a punch to his stomach. Was she alone? No, the night nurse was with her. She said your grandmother kept talking about you right until the end. She was so happy about your visit yesterday. David got dressed slowly and drove to the hospice. The same kind nurse who had shown him to his grandmother's room was waiting for him. She gave him a gentle hug and told him how much his visit had meant to his grandmother. "She was a special lady," the nurse said. "In all my years working here, I've never seen someone light up the way she did when you arrived." She kept telling everyone about her grandson who helped a stranger at the airport. David spent some time alone with his grandmother, holding her hand and talking to her one last time. He told her about Helen and Robert again, about how her lessons about kindness had guided him that day at the diner. He promised he would keep trying to be the good man she raised him to be. The next few days were a blur of funeral arrangements and paperwork. David's cousin helped with everything, but David felt lost without his grandmother. She had been his anchor, the one person who always believed in him no matter what. The funeral was small but beautiful. People from his grandmother's church came, along with neighbors who had known her for decades. Everyone had stories about how she had helped them over the years. She had brought food to sick neighbors, babysat children for free when parents couldn't afford childcare, and always had encouraging words for anyone going through hard times. "Your grandmother touched a lot of lives," the pastor said during the service, "but I think her greatest achievement was raising you. David, I can see her heart and her values living on in you." After the service, an older woman approached David. "You probably don't remember me," she said, "but I'm Mrs. Johnson from down the street. Your grandmother used to babysit my kids when they were little." David nodded politely. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Johnson." "I wanted to tell you something," she said. "Last week your grandmother called me. She was so excited because you were coming to visit, but she also told me about why your trip was delayed, about how you helped that woman at the airport." David looked surprised. "She told you about that?" Mrs. Johnson smiled. She was so proud. She said she always knew you had a good heart, but hearing that story made her feel like she had done her job right as a grandmother. She said helping others was the most important thing she ever taught you. David felt tears starting to form. "She taught me everything." "She knew that," Mrs. Johnson said. "And she knew you would keep making her proud." David flew back to the city on Wednesday. He felt empty and sad, but also somehow different. The ring on his finger reminded him that he was carrying on his family's tradition of kindness. His grandmother's words kept echoing in his head about being one of the good ones. When he got back to his apartment, Tony was waiting with takeout from the restaurant where he worked. "I figured you might not feel like cooking," Tony said. They sat at the kitchen table and David told Tony about the visit, the funeral, and everything his grandmother had said. Tony listened without interrupting, just like he had when David first told him about helping Helen. "Sounds like she was pretty amazing," Tony said. "She was," David said. "She always saw the best in people even when they couldn't see it themselves." David went back to work the next day. The warehouse felt the same, but everything else felt different. He found himself paying more attention to his coworkers, asking how they were doing, offering to help when someone looked stressed. During his lunch break, he saw a new guy sitting alone, looking overwhelmed. "First day?" David asked, sitting down next to him. "Yeah," the guy said. "I'm trying to figure out how everything works. Everyone seems to know what they're doing except me." David remembered feeling the same way when he started. Don't worry about it. Everyone feels lost at first. Want me to show you some tricks that might help? David spent his lunch break teaching the new guy shortcuts and giving him tips about which supervisors were friendly and which ones to avoid. It felt good to help someone even in a small way. That weekend, David got an unexpected phone call. It was Helen, the woman from the airport. "David, honey, I hope you don't mind that I got your number from my husband," she said. "I heard about your grandmother from Robert and I wanted to call and tell you how sorry I am." "Thank you," David said. "That's very kind of you to call." "I also wanted you to know something," Helen continued. "Meeting my grandson was one of the most important moments of my life, and it only happened because of your kindness. Your grandmother raised an incredible young man." They talked for 20 minutes. Helen told David about her grandson, how he was growing and changing every day. She said she thought about David often and had been telling everyone she met about the young man who gave up his own travel plans to help a stranger. "You changed my life that day," Helen said, "but I have a feeling you changed your own life too." David thought about that after they hung up. Maybe Helen was right. Helping her had led to getting the money to see his grandmother one last time. But it had also reminded him of who he wanted to be, the kind of person his grandmother had raised him to be. A few weeks later, David was delivering food when he saw a familiar scene. An older man was sitting on a bench at a bus stop looking confused and upset. David had seen that same expression on Helen's face at the diner. David parked his car and walked over. "Are you okay, sir?" The man looked up. "I'm trying to get to the hospital to see my wife, but I got on the wrong bus. Now I'm lost and visiting hours end in an hour. I don't know if I'll make it in time." David looked at his delivery bag. He had 3 orders to deliver and he needed the money. But he also heard his grandmother's voice in his head, reminding him about what really mattered. "What hospital?" David asked. The man told him, and David realized it was only about 15 minutes away. "Come on," David said. "I'll drive you there." "I can't pay you," the man said. "I spent all my money on the bus fare." "That's okay," David said, helping the man to his car. "Sometimes the most important things in life don't cost any money." As David drove the man to the hospital, he felt his grandmother's presence with him. He could almost hear her voice saying she was proud of him. The ring on his finger felt warm, like a reminder that kindness was the best inheritance anyone could leave behind. When they got to the hospital, the man tried to thank David, but David just smiled and told him to go see his wife. As David watched him walk through the hospital doors, he realized that helping others wasn't just something he did sometimes. It was who he was and who he would always be. 6 months had passed since David's grandmother died. The pain of losing her was still there, but it had changed into something softer. Instead of the sharp hurt he felt at first, now he carried warm memories of her voice and her lessons about kindness. David's life had started to change in small ways. At work, people began coming to him when they had problems or needed advice. His supervisor noticed how David helped the new employees and offered him a team leader position with a small raise. It wasn't much extra money, but every dollar helped. One evening after work, David was walking to his car when his phone rang. The number looked familiar, but he couldn't place it. "Hello, David. This is Robert, Helen's husband. We met a few months ago." "Of course," David said, smiling. "How are you and Helen doing?" "We're wonderful, thanks to you," Robert said. "Actually, that's why I'm calling. Helen and I have been talking, and we have something we'd like to discuss with you. Are you free this Saturday afternoon?" David was curious, but agreed to meet them at the same diner where he had first met Helen. When Saturday came, he arrived to find Helen and Robert already sitting at a corner table. Helen looked healthier and happier than when he had met her that difficult morning months ago. "David, sweetheart," Helen said, standing up to hug him. "You look good. How have you been?" They caught up over coffee and pie. David told them about his grandmother's funeral, his new position at work, and how he had been trying to help people whenever he could. Helen and Robert shared photos of their grandson, who had grown so much since Helen's visit. "We wanted to meet with you because we have a proposition," Robert said after they had talked for a while. David raised his eyebrows. "What kind of proposition?" Helen leaned forward. "Robert and I have been thinking about your story for months, what you did for me, and what your grandmother taught you about helping others. We think there are probably a lot of people out there who could use the same kind of help. We want to start a foundation," Robert explained. "Something small at first, but focused on helping people who are struggling financially but still find ways to help others. People like you. David was confused. I don't understand what you mean. Think about it, Helen said. You were struggling to save money to see your sick grandmother, but you still helped a stranger. There must be other people out there doing the same thing. Good people who sacrifice for others even when they don't have much themselves. Robert nodded. We want to find those people and help them. Maybe someone who gives their last $20 to buy groceries for a neighbor. Or someone who volunteers at a shelter even though they're working 3 jobs to pay rent. We're not talking about a huge operation, Helen added. Just something that could help a few people each month. Pay for someone's car repair so they don't lose their job, or help with rent when someone gets sick and can't work. David was amazed by the idea. That sounds incredible, but what does this have to do with me? We want you to help us run it, Robert said. You understand what it's like to struggle, but you also understand the importance of helping others. We think you'd be perfect for deciding who needs help and how to help them. David stared at them. Are you serious? Completely serious, Helen said. We've already talked to our lawyer about setting it up. We have enough money saved to help maybe 10 or 15 families this year. And if it works well, maybe we can grow it from there. I don't know anything about running a foundation, David said. Neither do we. Robert laughed. But we can learn together. We're thinking of calling it the Kindness Circle Foundation. The idea is that when you help someone, it creates a circle of kindness that keeps growing. David thought about his grandmother and all the people she had helped over the years. She would have loved this idea. What would I have to do? Help us find people who need assistance, Helen explained. We want to focus on people who are already helping others despite their own struggles. You seem to have a good eye for spotting good people. Over the next hour, they talked through the details. The foundation would start small, with Robert and Helen providing the initial funding. David would work with them part-time at first while keeping his warehouse job. They would look for nominations from community members, churches, and local organizations about people who deserved help. We want to help people like the man you drove to the hospital, Helen said, or someone like you who gives up their own plans to help a stranger. David felt excited about the possibility, but also nervous. Can I think about it for a few days? Of course, Robert said. Take all the time you need. That night, David called his cousin in Alabama and told him about the offer. His cousin was excited. Grandma would have been so proud, he said. She always said you were meant to do something special with your life. David also talked to Tony, who thought it was a great opportunity. You're already helping people all the time, Tony said. This would just let you help more people in bigger ways. On Wednesday, David called Robert and Helen to accept their offer. The next few weeks were busy with paperwork and planning. They set up a small office in a community center, and David learned about nonprofit organizations and how to manage applications for help. Their first case came from a local church. A single mother named Patricia had been working 2 jobs to support her 3 kids. When her youngest child got sick and needed surgery, she used all her savings for medical bills. Then her car broke down and she couldn't afford to fix it. Without a car, she couldn't get to her jobs and was about to be fired. But here was the thing that made Patricia special. Even while dealing with all these problems, she had been volunteering every Saturday to cook meals for homeless people at a local shelter. She never missed a Saturday, even when her own family was struggling. David, Helen, and Robert met with Patricia to hear her story. She was embarrassed about asking for help and kept saying she would figure things out on her own, but David could see the stress in her eyes and the worry about how she would take care of her children. How much would it cost to fix your car? Helen asked. The mechanic said about $800, Patricia said quietly, but I can probably find a cheaper place. David looked at Helen and Robert and they all nodded. We'd like to pay for your car repair, David said, and maybe help with some of your medical bills too. Patricia started crying. I can't accept that much help. It's too much. You've been helping other people even when you could barely help yourself, Helen said gently. Now it's time to let other people help you. They paid for Patricia's car repair and covered 2 months of her medical bills. A week later, Patricia called David to tell him she had been promoted to supervisor at one of her jobs because her manager was impressed with her dedication and reliability. I never would have gotten that promotion if I had lost my job. Because of my car, Patricia said. You saved my family. But David knew the truth. Patricia had saved herself by being the kind of person who helped others even when times were tough. The foundation had just given her a chance to keep being that person. As David hung up the phone, he looked at his grandfather's ring and thought about the circle of kindness that had started with helping Helen at the airport. Now that circle was growing bigger, reaching more people, creating more circles. His grandmother had been right. The most important thing was being one of the good ones and helping others be good ones too.